Well, let's transition to Romans 4. Romans 4 was a text that I wish we would have spent more time on. And I had a friend that was watching the debate who had watched some of Jeremiah's stuff, and he wished that there was some more exchange there in Romans 4 and what works there means. Is it works of the law of Moses, or is it your ergon, whatever you do? And so, go through the text however you'd like, but let's go to Romans 4.
Okay. So I really think that Jeremiah reads Romans anachronistically. He's reading Romans as though Paul is writing it to address the dispute between the Protestants and Rome. And that's obviously not the reason why Paul wrote it. That's not the problem that Paul's addressing. So it seems pretty clear to me that the problem Paul's addressing is this readmittance of Jewish Christians into the church in Rome, because Claudius' edict that had forced all the Jews to leave Rome, it's expired. And so now you've got Jews and Gentiles who are meeting together in the various congregations there in Rome, and that's causing problems. And so the question undoubtedly is arising is, do you have to keep the works of the law of Moses in order to be saved? And so Paul, in Romans chapter 3, he will say, therefore by the works of the law, no flesh is justified before him, for through the law is the knowledge of sin. And, it's just very clear in that place that he's talking about the law of Moses. Now, in the Q&A session, I was asked about this and, why I believe that these works are the law of Moses. And so I responded by pointing the person that asked to Romans 3, beginning in verse 27, where Paul asks, where therefore is boasting? It's excluded. Through what law? Of works? No, but through the law of faith. For we reckon that a man is justified by faith apart from ergon namu, apart from works of the law. And then the very next word in the next verse is or. Is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not also the God of the Gentiles? So in other words, if a person were justified by works of the law, God would be the God of the Jews only. So clearly the law that's in view is the law of Moses. And the works that are in view are the works of the law of Moses. Now when Paul moves into chapter 4, Paul begins chapter 4 by asking, what therefore shall we say that Abraham tan pra patera hemon kata sargon, or sarka, What therefore shall we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, has found? Now when you read through Romans, the book is addressed to the church as a whole. But there are times, like in chapter 11, where Paul is going to address the Gentiles specifically. And here's a time when Paul addresses the Jews specifically. What therefore should we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, has found? He's not talking specifically to Gentiles at this point, because Abraham is not the forefather of the Gentiles according to the flesh. He's the forefather of the Jews according to the flesh. So clearly Paul is addressing this problem of that the Jews would have. Do you have to keep the works of the law of Moses to be saved? Now, sometimes when people bring this up to Jeremiah, Jeremiah will say, well, Abraham lived so long before the law. That can't be what he's talking about, because he lived hundreds of years before the law. But the question is, what did the Jews of Paul's day think? And so I had prepared a quote to read from the Mishnah. And so this quote comes from Kiddushin, the 14th section of Kiddushin. And here's what Kiddushin 14 says. So too it is said of our father Abraham. And Abraham was old and well stricken in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And we find that Abraham, our father, had performed the whole law before it was given, for it is written, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So you see, Jewish tradition at this time held that Abraham had kept the law of Moses. And so Paul, in dealing with this question, he brings Abraham up and he says, okay, let's look at the text and let's just see, was Abraham justified by the works of the law of Moses? And circumcision is the big issue. Because again, the Jews had been binding circumcision on the Gentiles for salvation. That was the debate back in Acts chapter 15. That's the debate in the book of Galatians. And so Paul's going to argue from the scriptural presentation in Genesis of Abraham's life. He's going to show Genesis 15:6, Abraham was justified by faith. Is that before or after circumcision? He was circumcised in chapter 17. Well, it was before he was circumcised in chapter 17. So Abraham was justified apart from the work of circumcision. So obviously you don't have to be circumcised to be saved. That's Paul's argument there. But Paul is not saying that you don't have to obey in order to be saved. Because the type of faith that Abraham had in Romans chapter 4, and I bring this out in Jeremiah's cross-ex, is a faith that works. So verse 12 says that Abraham is the father of the circumcision to those who are not of the circumcision only, but who also, kai, tois, stoikusen, tois, iknesen, tes in akrabustia, pisteos tu patros hemon Abraham. To those who walk in the footsteps of the faith of our father Abraham when he was uncircumcised. So the faith that Abraham had was a faith that took steps. So again, if you just look at Paul's argument as he looks at the chronology of the life of Abraham, he's justified by faith, Genesis 15:6. That's before he circumcised, Genesis chapter 17, but it is after Genesis 12, Paul gets the command, Abraham gets the command from God to leave Ur of the Chaldees and come to a land that I'll show you. And so undoubtedly that's why Paul speaks in Romans 4:12 of these footsteps of faith that Abraham had. Abraham had this obedient faith, and it was that obedient faith in God's promises that resulted in Abraham being justified.
For sure. Now,
but it's apart from the works of the law of Moses.
Yes. Now, in response to that question, Jeremiah mentions the fact that there's a clear shift between Romans 3 and Romans 4 by mentioning the fact that Abraham was apart from the law or whatever. But the point that you mentioned, that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, I think that totally destroys his response to that, because clearly the audience is to the people who share flesh with Abraham.
Yeah, so we got a chapter-verse division between chapter 3, verse 31 and chapter 4, verse 1. But Paul is continuing his argument.
Absolutely.
So
now, to this, you said works.
Oh.
Yeah, well, to that point, define works, Michael. It doesn't, a work is anything you do. Anything you do. That's what ergon means. So, that was Jeremiah's rebuttal to the point about ergon. And so I figured now, we were going to spend time in that a little earlier, but let's spend time in that now. How does Jeremiah misuse BDAG with ergon and ergodzomai?
So I had printed out for Jeremiah BDAG's entry on ergon, which is just a noun that typically translated works. And so Jeremiah, in order to find out what ergon means, he just quotes definition number 1 in it, which says, that which displays itself in activity of any kind, deed, action. But you have to understand that in order to know what a word means in a particular passage, you've got to look at the context of that passage.
Yeah.
And this is just a base definition for the word. But how does BDAG interpret ergon in this passage in Romans chapter 4? Well, if you go to the end of that section, that is, part number 1 of this entry, here's what BDAG says. Frequently in Paul, erga namu, deeds that the law commands you to do. Romans 3:20, 28, compare verse 27, Galatians 2:16, 3:2, 5:10, 3:2, 5, and 10. Okay? And you keep on reading in the entry, and it says, also simply erga with the same meaning. That is, works that the law commands. And here, if you look up again, BDAG's entry on namas, you're going to find, looking for these passages, it's works of the law of Moses. But anyway, also simply erga with the same meaning, Romans 4:2 and verse 6, 9:12, 32, 11:6, Ephesians 2:9. So BDAG interprets the meaning of works, of ergon in these passages to be works of the law of Moses.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an interesting point, because, which I had a clip that I was going to play. It was so hard trying to figure out what clips to choose or not, just because you don't want to be accused of taking anyone out of context. You want to make sure that you're representing Jeremiah accurately. But, you know, again, we mentioned this before. Jeremiah wants to so emphasize context, how context is king. But yet, again, in these texts, he's not allowing the context to define his terms. He's saying, you know, earlier on, you begged the question and you didn't define your terms and you're assuming definitions. Well, Jeremiah, in every text, he's assuming the definition of works. It's anything you do. And the issue is, when lexicographers, when they're looking at these statements, when they're looking at these words, in this context, they don't agree with Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into our video. If you like this content and you want to see more of it, be sure to leave a like on the video, share it with a friend, and leave a comment telling us how you liked the video. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Also, be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, where we share lots of our content and we make many other posts over there. We're also on TikTok, and so if you want to follow us there, we're on there as well. All right, I hope everyone has a great day.